Hi there, Meridian. This is our first installment of our school ride read aloud from home. We started Song for a Whale as a school, and we want to continue it so we can finish reading the book together. So I want to start off at chapter 12. We might be all in different spots, but I can summarize the first 11 chapters and we can get started. So the book is about a girl named Iris who is deaf, and so are her grandparents. And she learns about a whale named Blue 55 who isn't able to communicate the way other whales communicate. And she first wonders if this whale is deaf too. She learns that he sings his songs different than other whales. We also learn that even though Iris can't hear, she is talented at fixing old radios. We learned that her grandfather passes away, and this affects her relationship with her grandmother, who becomes extremely sad. Iris contacts the scientists at the sanctuary where they've been tracking Blue 55 with her idea that the whale could be deaf. And then they actually contact her back and tell her that they believe that the whale wouldn't sing at all if he was deaf. It just seems to be that the other whales do not understand his songs, and they may never know why. And this doesn't really sit well with Iris, and she wants to know why. And the scientists say that they believe that Blue 55 may be lonely, and Iris understands what this feels like because she often feels lonely being deaf. So this brings us to chapter 12. If you're looking to catch back up in more than just that summary for chapters 1 through 11, you can actually go and Google into YouTube Song for a Whale, and what will come up right away is titled Week 1 Song for a Whale by Laura Gabbard. And she actually reads, and you can see the words from the books, all of the chapters 1 through 12, along with the rest of the books as well, or the rest of the pages. So you can Google it if you are interested in actually reading some of the chapters if you missed any of them. But we're going to get started right now with chapter 12. Mr. Gunner smiled and waved when I carried the Zenith into the shop. I set it on the counter and waited while he rang up a customer buying a creepy old doll. "It really works," he said after the customer left. Mr. Gunner used to have such a bushy mustache that it talked to him while he was trying to lip read a walrus. He kept it trimmed now so it didn't hang over his upper lip anymore. I nodded and invited him to check it out. Sometimes the radios needed a little more adjusting after I thought I was finished. I knew when a radio was working, but couldn't always tell if the sound was clear enough. Some static was too faint for me to feel crackling inside the speakers. Mr. Gunner's smile let me know I got it right. He shook his head and laughed. Then he looked at me so I could see his mouth. To make things clearer, he threw in a few signs he learned from me. I admit I wasn't sure if you could fix this one. He tied a price tag to the cord, then handed me the radio. After putting it on a shelf, I wandered around the store to see if there was anything I needed. Mr. Gunner gave me an employee discount even though I wasn't an official employee. The store was where I got first interested in electronics. Grandpa and I would pick up things like old lamps and toys and take them home to work on them together. Sometimes we'd take parts from different lamps and make a whole new one, like the bottle lamp I made for Grandma. Then I started not fixing things, but making things. I built an alarm clock that shook my mattress in the morning, all with parts I had picked up at Moe's. I made an alarm clock for Tristan, too. He could hear just fine, but he was just a deep sleeper, nothing could wake him. At first I gave him an alarm clock I connected to a truck horn. It did wake him up, but it also woke up my parents, who said they nearly had heart attacks when it went off. I made him another one out of an old toy police car that drove around his room blaring its sirens until I got him to turn it off. One day when Grandma and Grandpa were shopping for furniture, I discovered the radios. I pushed buttons and turned knobs trying to figure out how they worked. Mr. Gunner took the time to explain what he could, pointing at radio parts and jotting down notes on some scrap paper. Even better, he gave me a broken old radio to take home to work on. After he handed it to me and saw how excited I was, he held up a hand like he had warned me off something. "It'll be a challenge," he wrote. Well, that did it. I didn't know whether he meant that it'd be a challenge for anyone to repair that radio or for me because I wouldn't hear when it started working. Either way, I was taking it home. Lately, I'd been feeling like I could fix anything. I was ready for a challenge. So So it does sound pretty challenging. Remember, she can't hear anything, and here she is fixing radios, and they work off of sound. He added to the note, the best way to learn how to do something works is to take it apart and put it back together. I don't know what made him think I was smart enough to do that, but he did. It took a lot of work, and I almost gave up a few times, but eventually I did get the radio fixed. More importantly, it taught me how radios worked. I had lost count of how many I had repaired since then. I would have missed out on all that if I hadn't been there with my grandparents that day. Without that store and Mr. Gunner, I wouldn't know I was good at anything. After shelving the Zenith, I didn't find anything I needed, so I went back to the front counter empty-handed. As Mr. Gunner wrote out the check for my repair payment, something in the display case caught my eye. I held up a hand to stop him, then tapped the glass over the item. He smiled and put a giant key ring from his pocket so he could unlock the case, then looked at me to see if I was removing the right thing. I held out my hand and he placed the gold circle on my palm. It looked like an old pocket watch. Etched into the cover was an ocean scene with a whale leaping out of the water next to a sailing ship. With a fingertip, I traced the black outline of the whale. Mr. Gunner reached over and unlatched the cover, revealing not a watch, but a compass. Still works, he signed. A compass. Even better than a watch. I closed the cover and ran my finger over the etching again, wondering about who it had belonged to. A ship captain, I guess, because of the design. Before computers and GPS, people navigated with compasses and the stars in the sky. Finding that whale compass felt like a good sign, like maybe it'd bring me good luck in figuring out a way to talk to Blue 55. I held it up to let Mr. Gunner know to subtract the price from what he owed me. Something different, he said, then signed the check. Ready to sell me that Philco? He asked before I left. He didn't need to sign or write that down because he asked that every time. He was sort of teasing. Sure, he'd love that Philco back, but he also knew I'd never part with it. Chapter 13. Wendell's house was just a short bike ride from Mr. Gunner's shop. Before leaving home, I'd stuffed my notes about frequencies and piano keys into the front pocket of my jeans. Wendell's 9-year-old sister, Eleanor, was practicing tennis in the driveway as usual, a bundle of black braids flying behind her as she served a ball to get the garage door and chased after it for the return. One got past her and I grabbed it as it rolled toward the street. Looking good, I signed after tossing it back to her. Eleanor's goal was to be a better tennis player than Venus and Serena Williams put together. Not just because they'd be old by the time she could play them. She wanted to be good enough to beat them anytime. She set the ball and the racket down to free up her hands. Thanks! Getting ready for a match this weekend. Eleanor signed like a deaf person even though she was hearing. Wendell was the only one in their family who'd ever been deaf as far as anyone knew. Their parents started learning sign language right after Wendell was born and they signed all the time at home. His mom was even a teacher of the deaf at Bridgewood Junior High where Wendell would go next year. You'll do great. Wendell here? She pointed into the house while taking a gulp from her water bottle. Summer had hit Houston already, and Eleanor's brown face was shining with sweat. He's changing the stars, she signed after setting her bottle back down. Through the glass panel on the front door, I saw the flicker of the strobe light when I pressed the doorbell, followed by the tall figure of Wendell's mom. We had a flashing doorbell at home too, so I'd know when someone was at the door. I wired mine so that the lamps in the living room and my bedroom blinked on and off when someone rang the doorbell. Miss Jackson answered the door and smiled. Great to see you, she signed. Wendell's upstairs. I thanked her and ran up to Wendell's room where he stood on a wooden ladder pulling sticky plastic stars from the ceiling. His t-shirt read, "You are here," with an arrow pointing to a spot in the Milky Way. I didn't have to ask what he was doing. He was always rearranging the stars to match the current night sky. He gave me a one-handed "what's up" with the hand that wasn't holding a star chart. Can I play the piano? I asked. Probably not very well. I put a hand on one hip and signed, I'm serious, even though I was trying not to laugh. I mean, I want to check something out on the piano. He climbed down from the ladder and led me into his family's library which was also their piano room. We sat on the bench together and he asked, "So what's the thing you have to check out?" I handed him the slip of paper from my pocket. "It's about this whale." "What kind of whale?" "Not a kind of whale, just one specific whale. I learned about him in science." I placed a hand on top of the piano and Wendell did the same thing. At the top of the page I'd written regular whale 28 Hertz, first piano key 35 Hertz, fifth key. With one finger I struck the key on the far left. The low sound vibrated against my palm. I played it a few times so we could get to know the sound. Then I did the same thing with each key up to the fifth one, a black one that played 35 Hertz. Blue and fin whales didn't sing much higher than that. On the next line of the page I written 55 Hertz, 13th piano key. I counted over starting from the first key until I landed on the number 13, a white key this time. I played the note a few times and the vibration tickled my palm again, a bit lighter than the others. "So this whale," I explained again to Wendell, "that's what he sounds like." I hit the key again. "But here's what he's supposed to sound like." I struck the first key again. "So he can't talk to other whales." Wendell placed both hands on the top of the piano as I alternated between the two notes. "Not much of a difference," he signed. "It's a big difference for whales." He was right. It didn't feel like much of a difference. Less than a foot apart on the keyboard, but it separated Blue 55 from all other whales. I thought back to my visit with Grandma and how we sat right next to each other on the couch and couldn't think of what to say. The befuddled face on Wendell's father peeked into the room. He looked like a taller version of Wendell, but with a bald brown head instead of a buzz cut.